Clara had never imagined life could turn so cruel, so quickly. Just a year ago, she had been surrounded by the warmth and laughter of her small town. The market square was always bustling with people, voices echoing off the wooden buildings as merchants shouted their wares, children ran in playful circles, and neighbors stopped to share news and stories. Life, she had believed, was simple, if not easy. But simplicity, she learned, could vanish in a single cruel turn of fate. It had started with sickness. A fever spread through the town like wildfire, swift and merciless. People who had walked past Clara just days before, smiling and greeting her by name, were suddenly bedridden. The town's small doctor did what he could, but there were too few medicines, and the sickness was too strong. Families were torn apart. Parents buried their children, and children watched helplessly as their parents faded away. Clara had lost her own mother and father within weeks. She remembered the hollow feeling in her chest as she watched the tiny wooden coffin lowered into the earth, the sound of dirt hitting wood echoing like a hammer on her heart. Left alone, Clara wandered the empty streets, clutching the little belongings she could carry. Her home had become a silent shell, the laughter of the past replaced with a haunting quiet. The smell of dust and decay filled the air, and she realized that every corner of the town held a memory she could no longer bear to touch. Her neighbors had either left or perished, and the streets she had once run through freely now felt like a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. With no family and no home, Clara set out to survive. She walked along dusty roads, her feet blistered, her stomach aching with hunger. Each day was a struggle, each night a test of endurance. She slept under trees or in abandoned barns, trying to hide from the cold winds that cut through her thin clothing. Nights were the worst. The silence was so heavy that it pressed on her chest, and the shadows of her surroundings seemed to whisper fears she couldn't name. Food became the most pressing need. She had learned quickly that hunger could make even the strongest resolve falter. She scavenged wherever she could, berries hidden in bushes, roots from shallow soil, even the occasional leftover from a passing traveler's wagon. But the world was vast and unforgiving, and these meager meals were never enough. She could feel her body weakening, her energy fading, yet she forced herself to keep moving. There was no choice. She could not stop. To stop was to surrender, and surrender meant death in the unforgiving world she now inhabited. One morning, as the sun rose over a horizon tinged with gold and orange, Clara spotted a large ranch in the distance. The wooden fences stretched as far as her eyes could see, and beyond them were wide fields dotted with livestock. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of several buildings, promising warmth and perhaps food. The sight of people moving about, tending to their daily tasks, gave her a spark of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. Her approach was cautious. She knew she could not simply ask for help. Pride, even in desperation, still lingered within her, yet the hunger gnawed at her resolve, and she felt herself considering possibilities she would never have entertained before. The thought of offering something deeply personal in exchange for a meal crossed her mind, and she recoiled at it instantly. She had been raised to believe in dignity and respect, in the idea that a person's worth was not measured by what they could give, but by who they were. But hunger is a powerful force, relentless and cruel, and it made her heart race with fear and shame. Clara paused at the edge of the ranch, watching the workers move efficiently, talking softly to one another. They seemed content, strong, and secure, a world away from the chaos and loss she had endured. She wished she could step into their world, if only for a moment, and be part of something steady and safe. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the fear that had settled deep in her chest. Her eyes fell on the rancher, a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered and sturdy, moving with ease as he directed a group of workers. His presence was commanding, yet not harsh. There was a gentleness in the way he spoke, a calm confidence that made her pause. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps not everyone she met would seek to take advantage of her desperation. But still, fear and shame warred within her. She had never depended on anyone in her life, never admitted how fragile her situation had become. Pride had always been her shield, but hunger had chipped away at it like wind-eroding stone. She weighed her options. She could turn away, continue wandering, continue starving. Or she could approach, risking humiliation, and hope for mercy. The decision came slowly, painfully. Clara stepped forward, her legs trembling, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She kept her gaze low, avoiding the rancher's eyes, trying to summon words that would not betray her shame. The sun was high now, warm on her back, yet it could not ease the chill that had settled into her bones. As she reached the edge of the rancher noticed her presence, his brow furrowed slightly, not with anger but with curiosity. Clara's voice trembled when she finally spoke, each word a battle to release from her lips. She told him she was hungry, alone, and had nowhere to go. Her words were halting, punctuated by silence, each pause heavy with fear. The rancher listened quietly, his gaze steady without interruption. There was no mockery, no disdain, just attentive, careful observation. Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. She had prepared herself for rejection, for cruelty, but instead she found herself faced with something she hadn't dared to hope for: understanding. And then, in a calm voice that seemed to carry both authority and kindness, he said something that would forever change the course of her life. Words simple, yet profound. Gold isn't what we need here. You are. Clara froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The rancher's eyes held no judgment, only a quiet insistence that she was valued, that she had worth, that she did not need to give anything but herself to be accepted. For the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself to breathe fully. The weight of despair that had pressed on her chest eased, if only slightly. She realized that hope was not gone, that kindness still existed in the world, and that her life, fragile and uncertain as it was, could still find a place of safety and dignity. That day, as she took her first steps toward the ranch, Clara felt the stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the possibility of a future. The road behind her was filled with loss, but the path ahead, though uncertain, promised warmth, sustenance, and perhaps even belonging. And in that moment she understood that survival was not just about filling an empty stomach. It was about finding a place where one could be seen, respected, and valued for simply being human. Clara had never worked on a ranch before. Her life until now had been simple, filled with small chores at home and occasional help in her mother's tiny garden. She had never lifted heavy tools, fed animals, or cared for livestock. The vastness of the ranch seemed both inviting and overwhelming. Yet, with the rancher's unexpected kindness still echoing in her mind, she knew she had to try. Her first day began before the sun had fully risen. Mist clung to the fields like a thin veil, making the morning air feel cool and damp. The smell of fresh hay and the earthy scent of animals filled her senses. Workers moved with practiced ease, calling greetings to one another as they went about their tasks. Clara tried to follow their example, though every movement felt awkward and uncoordinated. The rancher, Elias, noticed her hesitation but did not scold her. Instead, he offered a gentle smile and guided her hands when she struggled. "The horses are gentle," he said, "but they can sense fear. Approach them slowly. Speak softly." Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she reached out to stroke the coat of a brown mare. The animal nickered softly, leaning into her touch. A warmth spread through her chest, small but real. For the first time in weeks, she felt capable, useful. The day was long. Clara carried buckets of water, swept the stables, and helped feed the animals. Each task was new, each challenge a test of her stamina and patience. She stumbled more than once, spilling water or dropping a tool. But the workers never laughed or sneered. Instead, they offered quiet guidance, a word of encouragement, a steadying hand. Clara found herself beginning to understand the rhythm of ranch life, the way work, though hard, created order and purpose in a world that had once felt chaotic. Lunchtime was a revelation. The workers gathered in a small wooden building, passing around simple but nourishing food: bread, cheese, boiled eggs, and fresh vegetables from the garden. Clara had not eaten a proper meal in days. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling the life return to her body. But it wasn't just the food that restored her, it was the sense of belonging. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was part of a community, even if it was only for a few hours each day. As the sun climbed higher, the rancher asked her to help with the animals. They led her to a pen where a young calf was struggling to stand. Its legs were weak, and it kept slipping on the wet ground. Clara felt panic rise in her chest. She didn't know if she could help. Elias knelt beside her, steadying the calf, and whispered instructions in a calm, patient voice. Together, they helped the animal regain its footing. The calf's small, grateful nuzzle against Clara's hand filled her with a sense of achievement she hadn't felt in years. She realized that her strength wasn't just in her body. It was in her willingness to care, to try, even when she felt uncertain. The afternoon brought more lessons. Clara learned to mend fences, carry feed, and clean the barn. Every task tested her, pushed her limits, and made her muscles ache in ways she had never known. Yet with each success, no matter how small, she grew more confident. The fear that had driven her to the ranch, the fear of hunger, of being alone, of being unworthy, began to loosen its grip. She began to feel capable, valued, and even respected. Despite the hard work, Clara found moments of quiet joy. She loved watching the sunrise over the rolling fields, the golden light spilling over the haystacks and the livestock. She marveled at the sound of birds singing in the morning and the way the wind moved through the tall grass. These simple things reminded her that the world still held beauty, even in its challenges. She began to understand that life's hardships were not just obstacles. They were opportunities to discover strength, resilience, and even happiness in unexpected places. By evening, Clara was exhausted. Her clothes were damp with sweat and dirt, her hands rough from the work, and her body ached in ways she had never imagined. Yet as she sat down to rest, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had survived her first day, learned new skills, and discovered that she could face challenges without giving in to fear. The exhaustion was not something to dread. It was a sign of growth, proof that she was adapting to this new life. The rancher, Elias, checked on her as the sun began to dip behind the hills. He offered a kind smile and a word of encouragement. "You did well today, Clara. Keep this up, and you'll grow stronger than you think." She nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. His kindness, patience, and guidance were slowly rebuilding her confidence, teaching her that not all people would seek to take advantage of her. Some would lift her up, help her find her footing, and value her simply for being herself. Yet, the days that followed were not without difficulty. Clara struggled with fatigue, with sore muscles, and with moments of doubt. Sometimes, she felt the old fear creeping back, the fear that she didn't belong, that she was not strong enough, that she might fail. But each time she found herself remembering Elias's words and the quiet encouragement of the workers. Slowly, these fears lost their power over her. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting even when fear was present. As Clara grew more comfortable with the ranch, she also learned about the lives of those around her. Each worker had a story of hardship and survival, of loss and resilience. They shared tales of growing up in distant towns, of learning the ways of the land, of finding hope in small victories. Clara listened with wide eyes, realizing that everyone carried burdens, and that kindness and understanding were rare treasures in a harsh world. She felt honored to be part of their community, even if her role was small at first. One evening, as the sky blushed with shades of pink and purple, Clara walked along the edge of the fields. She watched the animals settle for the night and felt a quiet pride in the work she had done. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the scent of hay, earth, and freedom. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer just a lost girl wandering aimlessly. She was a part of something, a contributor, a person with value and purpose. But even as she embraced this new life, Clara could not forget the fear that had brought her here. Hunger had driven her to the ranch, and the memory of desperation lingered like a shadow. She knew that she had been on the edge, willing to give up her dignity just to survive. The thought made her shiver, but it also reminded her how far she had come. She was no longer that frightened, starving girl. She had found strength within herself, in the kindness of others, and in the work that challenged her body and mind. By the end of the week, Clara had begun to settle into a routine. She woke with the sun, worked alongside the ranchers, and went to bed exhausted but fulfilled. She laughed for the first time in what felt like months, her laughter mingling with the sounds of the ranch. She began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known before. It was a slow process, filled with hard work and small victories, but each step brought her closer to a life of stability, safety, and hope. Clara also started to understand a lesson she would carry forever. Life would always bring challenges, and fear and hunger would come again in some form. But with determination, courage, and the support of those willing to help, she could face whatever came her way. She was learning that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about growing, adapting, and discovering the strength she never knew she had. By the time she lay down to sleep that first week, Clara's mind was quiet, and her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She thought of her parents, of the town she had lost, and of the long, uncertain road ahead. She felt gratitude for the man who had chosen kindness over judgment, for the workers who had welcomed her, and for the small victories that reminded her of her own resilience. And as she drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was no longer alone. She had found a place where she could grow, where she could heal, and where she could begin to rebuild her life, one day at a time. Weeks had passed since Clara first set foot on the ranch, and though she had grown stronger and more confident, the challenges of ranch life were far from over. Each day brought new lessons, new hardships, and new moments that tested her courage. Clara had learned the rhythms of feeding animals, mending fences, and carrying water, but nothing had prepared her for the trials that the land and its unpredictable ways could bring. She knew survival meant more than just working hard. It meant learning to face the unknown without panic, and to trust in herself even when fear whispered doubts in her ear. It was early one morning when the first real test came. Clara had been assigned to help move the cattle from one pasture to another. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden light across the rolling fields. The workers gathered, their voices calm and organized as they called the animals forward. Clara's heart raced. She had moved cattle before, but never such a large herd. Their size and unpredictability made her nervous. One wrong step, one sudden panic among the animals, and the consequences could be serious. Elias, the rancher, noticed her apprehension and walked beside her. "Remember," he said gently, "stay calm. Animals can sense fear. Lead them steadily, but don't push too hard. You'll do fine." His voice carried reassurance, but Clara's stomach nodded. She nodded, gripping the lead rope tightly, and took a deep breath. She reminded herself that she had survived worse days, that hunger and loneliness had not broken her, and that she could handle this too. The herd started to move, slow at first, then faster as the animals realized they had a path to follow. Clara kept pace, calling softly, keeping her tone steady. But then, a sudden noise startled a young calf. It bolted sideways, trampling through the grass, and a few others followed its lead. Panic surged through Clara. She stumbled, nearly dropping the rope, and her heart thumped wildly. She could feel fear creeping in, the same fear that had driven her to the ranch weeks ago. But then she remembered Elias's words, remembered the calm guidance he had offered. She took another deep breath, steadied herself, and called the animals in a firm, gentle voice. Slowly, carefully, she guided the herd back into line. When the chaos settled and the cattle were moving steadily again, Clara felt a rush of pride. Her hands were sore, her arms tired, and her heart still racing, but she had faced fear and acted anyway. Elias clapped her shoulder gently. "Well done, Clara. That's how you earn trust, not just from people, but from the animals, too." She smiled weakly, feeling the truth in his words. The herd followed her now without hesitation, a small but significant victory that reminded her she was growing stronger with every challenge she faced. As the day went on, Clara found herself learning more than just practical skills. She began to notice the subtleties of ranch life, the way the workers communicated without words, the patterns in the behavior of the animals, and the quiet moments that held meaning if she paid attention. She learned patience, the value of observation, and the importance of timing. Each task required focus, careful judgment, and sometimes improvisation. She realized that the ranch was more than a place of work. It was a living, breathing world with rules she had to understand and respect. But challenges came not only from the animals or the work itself. One afternoon, Clara faced a test that shook her confidence more deeply than any physical task could. She had been sent to repair a fence at the far end of the property, where the ground was uneven and the soil soft from recent rains. As she worked, a sudden gust of wind caused a loose plank to shift and fall, narrowly missing her. Her heart pounded, and for a moment she froze, overwhelmed by fear. Elias appeared almost instantly, calm and steady. "It's all right," he said, helping her steady the plank. "Mistakes happen. You're learning. Don't let fear stop you." Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she resumed her work. She realized then that fear was not something to eliminate. It was something to acknowledge and manage. Each time she faced it, she grew stronger. Each time she rose after a stumble, she built resilience. She began to understand that her greatest challenge was not the physical labor or even the danger. It was mastering her own doubts and insecurities. As the weeks continued, Clara found herself becoming more integrated into the ranch community. The workers, who had once been strangers, now treated her as one of their own. They shared stories of their lives, lessons learned from hardship, and quiet humor that lightened even the hardest days. Clara discovered that laughter could exist alongside toil, that camaraderie could make even the toughest work bearable. She began to look forward to these small moments of connection, realizing that belonging was as vital as food or shelter. Yet despite this growing confidence, Clara's heart carried a lingering shadow. She remembered the desperation that had driven her to the ranch in the first place, the hunger, the fear of having nowhere to go, and the thought of giving up her dignity just to survive. Those memories were never far from her mind, a quiet reminder of the vulnerability she had once felt. But now, she approached those memories differently. They were no longer chains that held her back. They were markers of how far she had come. She had endured, she had learned, and she had grown stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, Clara found herself alone near the edge of the fields. She watched the cattle settle into the pasture and listened to the soft murmur of the wind through the grass. A sense of calm washed over her, a feeling she had not known in months. The day had been long and challenging, but she had survived it. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and learned new skills that made her feel capable. And she realized that this was more than just survival. It was growth. Her thoughts drifted to Elias. She admired him, not only for his strength and skill, but for his patience and kindness. He had never demanded anything of her that compromised her dignity. Instead, he had offered guidance, encouragement, and respect. Clara understood that true leadership was not about authority or fear. It was about supporting others, helping them rise, and seeing their worth even when they doubted themselves. As she walked back to the main house for supper, Clara felt a subtle shift within herself. She was no longer the frightened, hungry girl who had stumbled onto the ranch weeks ago. She had faced challenges that tested her body, mind, and spirit, and she had emerged stronger. Each lesson learned, each obstacle overcome, was a testament to her resilience. She was beginning to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities, and to see the possibilities of a future she had once thought impossible. But the turning point of her journey was still to come. Clara sensed that life on the ranch, while teaching her strength and resilience, was also preparing her for a choice she would have to make. A moment where courage, honesty, and integrity would all be tested, and where her past and her present would collide. She did not yet know when this moment would arrive, but she felt it in the air, like the calm before a storm. In the meantime, Clara continued her work with diligence and care. She fed the animals, repaired fences, and assisted in the daily routines of the ranch. Each task, no matter how small, was a step toward mastering her environment and discovering the depth of her own abilities. She found satisfaction in accomplishment, pride in perseverance, and a quiet joy in the knowledge that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. As night fell and the ranch settled into quiet, Clara stood for a moment on the porch of the main house, looking out over the fields. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling above the land she was slowly learning to call home. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for food that filled her belly, for work that gave her purpose, and for people who had shown her kindness when she had nothing to give in return. Clara understood now that life would always bring challenges, fears, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and wisdom to face them. She had survived hunger, loneliness, and fear. She had learned the ways of the ranch, and she had discovered a resilience within herself that was unshakable. And as she turned to go inside, she carried with her a quiet certainty. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination, courage, and hope that had brought her this far. Clara's days on the ranch had grown into a rhythm that was both challenging and comforting. She had learned to rise with the sun, work tirelessly, and find satisfaction in her accomplishments. Yet, as the weeks passed, she began to sense that life on the ranch held more than just lessons in work and survival. It carried tests of character, choices that would shape her future, and moments that would define who she truly was. Clara could feel it quietly building, like the tension before a storm, though she did not yet know what form it would take. One morning, Elias approached her with a look of seriousness she had rarely seen on his face. The sun was just climbing over the horizon, and the air was crisp and still. "Clara," he said, "there's a situation we need to handle together. The creek overflowed last night. Some of the fences are damaged and a few animals are missing. His voice was calm, but the weight of responsibility pressed on Clara immediately. This was not a routine task. This was a test of everything she had learned, her courage, her skills, and her ability to act under pressure. Clara nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. This was not a single task with clear instructions. This was a problem that required quick thinking, adaptability, and calm judgment. She followed Elias toward the affected area, her heart pounding in rhythm with her footsteps. The sight that greeted her was daunting. The creek had spilled over, waterlogged the ground, and swept away parts of the fences. Several cows were scattered across muddy fields, and a few calves huddled near the edge, frightened and unsure where to go. Clara's first instinct was to panic, but she forced herself to take a deep breath and assess the situation. Panic would not help the animals or the ranch. She remembered all that Elias had taught her: patience, observation, and steady action. She began to organize the rescue, moving carefully to guide the frightened cows toward safety, while Elias reinforced the fences with strong boards and ropes. Each step demanded attention. Each action required thought, and each mistake could have consequences. Hours passed as they worked tirelessly. Clara found herself drenched in sweat and mud, her hands blistered from gripping ropes and pushing boards into place. The sun climbed high overhead, beating down on her back, yet she refused to stop. Every time an animal strayed too close to danger, she stayed calm, guiding it gently, calling softly, and ensuring it followed the path to safety. Her fear of failure, which had once gripped her like a vice, now transformed into determination. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act in spite of it. As the afternoon wore on, Clara faced her first true test of emotional strength. A young calf, separated from its mother, stumbled into the mud and began to cry. Clara's heart sank. She had grown attached to the animals in the weeks she had cared for them, and seeing this calf in distress tugged at her emotions. But she knew she could not allow panic or sadness to take over. Kneeling beside the calf, she whispered calming words and carefully lifted it from the mud. She carried it to a safe area and tended to its small, trembling body. The calf nuzzled her hand, and Clara felt a surge of relief and pride. She had faced not only a physical challenge, but an emotional one as well, and she had prevailed. By late afternoon, most of the animals were accounted for, and the fences had been repaired. Clara was exhausted, her muscles aching, her clothes soaked and caked with mud, but there was a sense of accomplishment that she had never experienced before. Elias stood beside her, smiling proudly. "You did very well today, Clara. I knew you could handle it, but I'm impressed by your patience, your courage, and your care." His praise filled her with a warmth that went beyond simple satisfaction. It was recognition, not of perfection, but of effort, heart, and resilience. That evening, as the workers gathered for a simple meal, Clara reflected on the day's events. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She had come to the ranch frightened, desperate, and alone. She had arrived with only hope, fragile and tentative, that she might find food and shelter. Now, she stood as a capable, valued member of the ranch, trusted to handle crises, and respected by those around her. Her transformation was not just physical, it was emotional and mental, a growth born from hard work, courage, and the kindness she had been shown. Yet, amidst this triumph, Clara knew that challenges were never truly over. Life had a way of testing people in unexpected ways, and soon she would face a challenge that would ask more of her than just physical endurance or practical skills. It would demand honesty, integrity, and the courage to face her own heart. She felt a quiet anticipation, a sense that the next days might shape not only her role on the ranch, but her understanding of herself and what she wanted from life. The next morning brought another test, though subtler than the physical challenges of the creek and the scattered cattle. Elias had assigned Clara to assist in preparing a shipment of supplies for a neighboring ranch. It was a task that required precision, organization, and the ability to follow instructions carefully. At first, it seemed simple, almost mundane compared to the chaos of the previous day. But Clara quickly realized that the task required more than she had expected. Some of the supplies were heavy, others fragile, and the work demanded attention to detail to ensure nothing was lost or damaged. As she sorted and packed, Clara noticed that some of the younger workers struggled with the task. She offered guidance, showing them how to lift properly, how to secure items, and how to move efficiently. She discovered that leadership was not about authority, it was about support, teaching, and encouragement. Her confidence grew as she realized that she could not only complete her own work, but help others succeed as well. The sense of responsibility was daunting, but it was also empowering. She understood that growth was not only about surviving, but about rising to meet challenges that tested every aspect of her character. By midday, the shipment was ready, and Clara had proven her ability to handle responsibility under pressure. Elias acknowledged her efforts with a quiet nod and a smile. "You've come a long way, Clara. You've shown skill, patience, and heart. That's what matters most." Clara felt a deep satisfaction, a sense of belonging and the quiet pride of someone who had earned their place through determination, care, and courage. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the fields, Clara noticed a small group of children from a nearby homestead watching her. They had come to see the ranch and the animals, their eyes wide with curiosity. Clara smiled and waved, remembering how she had once been that young, innocent, and unaware of the challenges that life could bring. The sight reminded her of how far she had come, not just in skill, but in resilience, empathy, and understanding. She realized that her journey was not only about survival or work, but about learning to navigate the world with courage, kindness, and integrity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara returned to the main house, tired but fulfilled. The events of the day, from the challenges at the creek to the responsibilities of the shipment, had pushed her to her limits. Yet, in overcoming them, she discovered strength, resilience, and a growing sense of self-worth. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and responsibility, and she had risen to meet them. That night, as she lay in her small room, Clara reflected on her journey. She thought about the desperation that had brought her to the ranch, the hunger and fear that had haunted her days and nights. She thought about the kindness of Elias, the camaraderie of the workers, and the lessons she had learned from the animals and the land. She understood that her life had changed in ways she could never have anticipated. She had learned that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. That true strength was not just physical, but emotional, and that dignity and self-worth could never be taken from someone who valued them. Clara also realized that her journey was far from over. The challenges of life on the ranch would continue, and new trials would arise, testing her skills, her heart, and her determination. But she felt ready. She had discovered a courage she had never known, a resilience that had carried her through fear and despair, and a sense of purpose that gave her strength. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she could face it, not as the frightened girl who had arrived weeks ago, but as someone who had learned to rise above fear, to act with integrity, and to find hope in even the most difficult circumstances. In the quiet of the night, Clara drifted to sleep with a sense of peace. The world outside her window was vast and unpredictable, but she felt prepared to meet it. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. And she knew that the lessons she had learned, the value of courage, the strength of resilience, and the importance of kindness, would guide her for the rest of her life. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly became months. Clara had changed in ways she could never have imagined when she first stumbled onto the ranch. Hungry, frightened, and unsure of her place in the world. The young woman who had once wandered aimlessly with nothing but hope in her heart had grown into someone strong, capable, and confident. Every chore she performed, every animal she cared for, and every interaction with the workers had built a resilience within her that nothing could shake. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving, finding meaning, purpose, and even joy in a life that had once seemed impossible. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the golden fields, Clara walked along the edge of the pasture, tending to the animals with care she had honed over months of hard work. The air smelled of fresh hay and dew, a scent she had come to associate with security and comfort. Each cow, each horse, and even the smallest calf responded to her presence, recognizing the quiet patience and steady hand she offered. There was a rhythm to her movements, a harmony with the life of the ranch that brought a sense of peace she had never known. Elias watched her from a distance, leaning against a fence post, a quiet smile on his face. He had observed her growth with pride, admiration, and a subtle tenderness that he rarely expressed openly. He had not only taught her the ways of the ranch, but had nurtured her confidence, self-respect, and resilience. Unlike anyone she had ever known, he had never demanded anything from her beyond honesty, hard work, and integrity. In doing so, he had helped her discover a sense of worth she had thought lost forever. That morning, Elias approached her and handed her a small bundle of letters that had arrived for the ranch. Clara took them with a sense of curiosity and excitement. Among the letters was one addressed to her, written in a neat, familiar hand. She recognized it immediately. It was from a distant relative who had heard of her hardships and wanted to reconnect. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the words on the page carrying warmth, care, and the promise of family she had thought lost. Tears pricked her eyes as she read the letter, a mix of relief, joy, and gratitude flooding through her. For the first time in months, Clara felt the full weight of her journey. She had faced hunger, loneliness, fear, and despair. She had confronted challenges that tested her physically, emotionally, and mentally. And yet, through it all, she had persevered. She had learned the value of hard work, the power of patience, the importance of kindness, and the strength of self-belief. Every struggle had shaped her, every lesson had strengthened her, and every act of compassion she had received had reminded her that she was never truly alone. As the day wore on, Clara found herself reflecting on her time at the ranch. She thought of the first moments she had arrived, desperate and trembling, and the fear that had driven her to consider choices she had never imagined making. She remembered the kindness of Elias, the patience of the workers, and the small victories that had slowly built her confidence. Each memory was a reminder of her journey, from despair to hope, from fear to courage, from uncertainty to strength. By evening, the ranch settled into its familiar quiet rhythm. Clara walked to the main house where a simple meal awaited her. She ate slowly, savoring the taste of food that no longer represented mere survival, but nourishment, comfort, and care. The workers gathered around her, chatting and laughing softly, sharing stories of their day. Clara joined in, her voice steady and confident, her laughter blending naturally with theirs. The sense of belonging she felt now was profound. She had earned her place in this community, not through desperation or fear, but through determination, care, and perseverance. That night, as she prepared for bed, Clara felt a mixture of peace and anticipation. She had survived the storm of her past and grown stronger for it, but she also knew that life would continue to present challenges. She felt ready, not because she had all the answers, but because she had discovered the resilience courage, and wisdom within herself to face whatever came next. She had learned that true strength came not only from physical skill, but from the ability to act with honesty, integrity, and compassion. Elias entered her room quietly, carrying a small lantern. He paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment, and then spoke softly. "Clara, you have grown so much. You've faced every challenge, learned every lesson, and shown strength beyond measure. I am proud of you." Clara looked up, her eyes glistening, and smiled. "I wouldn't be here without your guidance," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You showed me that there is kindness in the world, even when life feels impossible." Elias shook his head gently. "You had that strength all along. I only helped you see it. Remember, Clara, courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to act, even when fear is there. You have done that every day since you arrived." His words resonated deeply with her, reinforcing the lessons she had learned through months of hard work, challenges, and growth. She realized that her journey was not only about survival, it was about discovering who she truly was and the strength she carried within. The following days brought more routine, but Clara's perspective had shifted. She approached each task with confidence and care, finding satisfaction in her accomplishments and joy in the simple moments of connection with the animals and workers. She had learned to appreciate the small victories, the calm of a contented animal, the laughter of her companions, the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Each moment reinforced the lessons of resilience, patience, and self-respect that she had been learning since her arrival at the ranch. One afternoon, Clara took a walk along the edge of the property, reflecting on the changes in her life. The fields stretched endlessly before her, golden in the late afternoon sun, and the soft breeze carried the familiar sense of earth, hay, and freedom. She thought about the girl she had been when she first arrived, hungry, alone, and unsure of her worth, and marveled at how far she had come. She understood now that strength and courage were not about avoiding hardship, but about facing it, learning from it, and using it to grow. Clara also realized the power of kindness and compassion. The way Elias had treated her, with patience, respect, and encouragement, had changed the course of her life. She understood that even small acts of care could have a profound impact, not only in moments of desperation, but in shaping someone's confidence, resilience, and belief in their own worth. She vowed to carry this lesson forward, not only in her work on the ranch, but in every encounter she would have in the future. As evening fell, the ranch settled into quiet again. Clara stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sense of peace she felt was profound. She had faced hunger, fear, and loneliness, yet she had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident than she had ever imagined. The journey had not been easy, but every challenge had brought lessons. Every obstacle had strengthened her resolve, and every act of kindness had reminded her that life, even in its hardships, held beauty, hope, and meaning. The next morning, Clara received another letter, this one from the town she had once called home. It contained messages of support, encouragement, and news of relatives who wanted to reconnect. Reading it, she felt a sense of closure for the pain of her past and hope for the future. She understood that while her journey had begun in despair, it had led her to a place of strength, belonging, and possibility. She was no longer the frightened girl seeking food or shelter. She was Clara, a young woman who had faced challenges, learned courage, and discovered her own worth. By the end of the week, Clara had fully embraced her life on the ranch. She continued to work diligently, care for the animals, and support the workers around her. She laughed freely, shared stories, and experienced the quiet joy of accomplishment. Each day reinforced the lessons she had learned, that courage comes from action, that resilience comes from perseverance, and that kindness and respect can transform lives. Clara understood now that life would always bring challenges, fears, and moments of doubt. But she no longer feared them. She knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way, the courage to act even when afraid, and the wisdom to navigate life with integrity and compassion. She had transformed not only her circumstances but herself, emerging stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. In the quiet of the evening, as she prepared for bed, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived the darkest moments of her life, faced challenges that tested her body and spirit, and discovered the power of courage, resilience, and kindness. She had found a home on the ranch, a community that valued her, and a sense of purpose that gave meaning to her days. And as she drifted into sleep, she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer defined by fear, hunger, or loneliness. She was Clara, strong, capable, and full of hope, ready to embrace the future with courage and heart.